Hello, lovely beans. How are you doing? How was your weekend? How are things going? Today is going to be chapter 11 of May Contain Traces of Magic, J.W. Wells & Co. Book 6. I'm going to miss this one because there's like 15 chapters in this particular book, and it is one of my favourites. We're having this conversation earlier this morning, and I always love this part of Tom Holt's writing because his books are always so varied. But one thing you can rely on is that about 2/3 the way through, he just flips on your head and goes, fooled you. I think he's awesome. He's one of my favourite authors, and the plan is eventually to have all my Tom Holt books in this room all set up. But of course, you know, these things always take time when you've got all the bookshelves and all the books, but yeah. So, thank you all very much for the conversations in the comments. It's always such a delight to see, and I appreciate it very, very much. I love the references to The Prisoner, for example, to Bagpuss as well. I always love the magical mechanical mouse organ, and it's actually one of the things I chunt on about when I'm doing something. You know, we will mend it, we will fix it, we will stick it with scissors and glue. Please excuse if I've ad-libbed that a bit and changed any parts of it, but that's how I like to sing it, and it makes me happy. Right, anyway, chapter 11 of May Contain Traces of Magic, J.W. Wells & Co. Book the 6. It was one of those meltdown moments. Karen was scowling furiously. Their relationship was in the crusher, waiting for the big steel ram to drop, unless Chris found exactly the right form of words, delivered in precisely the right tone of voice. It would all be over, apart from arguing about whose aunt had given them the round white formica top table in the kitchen. He blinked, took a deep breath, and noticed something. "Ah, those new earrings," he said. At least he had the satisfaction of stopping her dead in her tracks. "What?" "Those earrings," he said. "I don't think I've seen you wearing them before." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It was as though someone had pressed the mute button, followed by a pause. "They're nice," Chris said. "I like them." 3, maybe 4 seconds before she answered. "I got them in Debenhams," she said. It was the way she said it, 180 degrees from her previous tone, defensive, which was all to the good in the short-term technical sense. But that was no longer the most important issue. He needed to know. "Recently?" he asked. "About 3 weeks ago," Karen replied. Then she rallied, but it was more desperation than aggression, and repeated, "Who's Angela?" "Oh, her," he replied with a sad grimace. "Girl at work. She got killed." "Killed?" Chris nodded. "Rather a nasty accident, apparently. I was having a nightmare about it, actually. Don't know why. Freud would know." You never told me?" His chance for a big, nasty smile. "Well, you're never here to tell, are you?" "Oh, I know," he went on, pushing his luck like a bobsleigh crew trying for a fast launch. "You're so busy at work these days. It's all very important, and you've got your career to think about, and I understand, I do. Really, it's just—" He couldn't think of anything suitably sensitive to say, so he sensibly left it at 3 wistfully trailing dots. "It's just while we've got this big promotion on," she said, double defensive. Nice to see someone else fighting a losing battle on 2 fronts for a change, Chris thought smugly. I'd have done it better, but I've had so much more practice. "As soon as it's finished, I promise, we'll have loads more time." "Yes. Well." A turn of phrase and a tone of voice cribbed directly from Karen, but she didn't seem to have noticed. She was more concerned with trying to claw her hair unobtrusively over her ears to hide the earrings, which reminded him he had more important things on his mind than point scoring. "Kingfishers, aren't they?" What? Chris smiled. Your earrings? What? Oh, yes, right. I bought them to go with the blue top I got in monsoon, but they're not quite right, which is why I haven't worn them before. Still, if you like them... Liar, he thought, and had to make an effort not to grin. Not kingfishers. Similar, but not. Very much, he said. They remind me of something, but I can't quite remember. God, is that the time? Got to go. Karen leaned forward, darted a peck at him, and fled, slamming the front door behind her. Chris sat down, his chin in his hands, and thought, just when I was sure it couldn't get any weirder. Because, yes, now he came to think of it, the girl in the dream, the nice demon who'd tried to kiss him, had been Angela in a sort of way, and Karen's earrings hadn't been kingfishers. They'd been hummingbirds. First things first, Chris phoned the office, explained that he was dying of cholera, foot and mouth disease, and the bubonic plague, and therefore wouldn't be able to make his rounds today. So could someone please ring round and reschedule? How long was he planning on being dead for, they asked. Permanently, he replied, but he'd undoubtedly be reincarnated as a sales rep either tomorrow or the day after, so he'd be able to catch up early next week. Next, he made himself a cup of ultra-strong black coffee, sat down in the armchair, and tried to think. He thought, the one who is to come. Annoying phrase, needlessly mystical, but he was going to have to deal with it sooner or later, if he didn't want this shambles to continue indefinitely. He thought about Jill, and yes, she'd have done quite well, because she did feed off other people's emotions. She'd done it as long as he'd known her. Or Angela, assigned to him for no genuinely good reason, and the fuss had only started when she came on the scene. And how about the way she'd transformed herself from a silent, miserable adolescent to bouncy jam dispenser, thereby stirring up a whole shopping trolley full of emotions right across the Midlands. Jill had even admitted it. Just suppose, Chris said to himself, that they're both lying. Just suppose, for instance, that it was the real Angela, not a demonically crafted replica who'd lured him to the Ettingate retail park in her own personal Suzuki Jeep, in whose seat belt the marks of his fingernails were still visible shortly thereafter, which was more or less what the nice demon had confessed half an hour ago, in this very room, in which case she was one of the demons hunting the one who is to come. But were they the baddies, as SatNav had told him, or what they themselves claimed to be, the enlightened, liberal, reformed tendency? And who'd suborned honest John to flush him down the toilet? Jill, as an undercover one who is to come hunter, made a degree of sense too. What better way to do her job than to infiltrate the human's demon-hunting agency at the highest level? But the evidence for her being a demon at all turned on her emotional vampire status, which surely argued that she was a dissident rather than a fundamentalist, if he believed SatNav's version rather than the demon's own. Weymouth. Now, quite possibly his closest shave yet, though there wasn't a lot in it. He had assumed, of course, that the demon he'd seen there had been disguised as Karen, the same way the Ettingate attacker had been disguised as Angela. That, however, wasn't a rock-solid analogy anymore, because if the Ettingate Angela had been the real thing, then what reason did he have to believe that Weymouth Karen was a replica, or that demons could actually do the shape-shifting thing at all? Oh, come on, Chris thought. They can't all be demons. Can they? Don't answer that, he thought. Instead, let's go back to the time between Ettingate and Honest John's. At Ettingate, he told the demon that he hadn't a clue about the one who is to come, and she'd believed him. Fine. There, logic demanded, the matter should have rested. So why, shortly afterwards, should demonkind have made another attempt to snatch him, presumably to ask him the same question all over again? Chris made a genuine effort to think about that one, but the thought of Honest John's attempt to pitch him down the toilet kept diverting him onto the subject of hummingbirds, which was somewhere he simply didn't have the energy to go. He was just starting to feel the onset of a really nasty caffeine migraine when a flash of light dazzled his mind's eye and... Gandhi. Now he came to think of it, blindingly obvious. Non-violent resistance, a turning of the back on the vicious cycle of bloodshed and reprisal, the martyr hounded and persecuted for the noble cause. Gandhi was just the book's infuriating, elusive way of drawing his attention to the one who is to come. Well, fine. Glad to have got that one out the way, but really no further forward at all, and about par for the course as far as the book's usefulness was concerned. Which left him with probably the biggest and most inscrutable weirdness of the lot, namely SatNav, soi-disant princess of the Fae, completely and utterly reliable if you wanted to get from Sturchley to Walsall without getting bunged up in the rush hour traffic, but not necessarily to be trusted implicitly on other subjects. True, he had reason to doubt what Jill had told him. But he had other, more reliable witnesses who said the same as she did, and all that stuff about the fear and dreams and music. I'm missing the point, Chris told himself. There's something else I'm not even considering, and it's the key to everything. Something simple. It shouldn't have to be me, he said aloud. Sod it. What did I do? He made an effort to pull himself together. Come along now, he said to himself. You've taken a day off work to get all this stuff sorted out. You'd better get a move on. Now, where to start? It was a bit like those join the dots puzzles. You know, when he was a kid. People gave him books full of them because children really enjoyed them. It challenged their young minds and meant they grow up to be astrophysicists. He'd hated them, of course. He was a mind that hated challenges of any kind. Which socks shall I wear today? Which channel shall I watch? And he contemplated the vast, sprawling nature of the problem and absolutely despaired. Never was any good at unravelling bits of tangled string either. Fine, he thought. There are two ways of solving a mystery. Either you start off by examining all the evidence, evaluating it carefully, winnowing the fallacies from the things that were capable of being scientifically proved, then sorting the facts into a rational hypothesis, which you then test by experiment and dialectic inquiry to arrive at the truth. Or you ask somebody. Chris picked up the phone, dialed, waited, gave a name, waited some more, and then said, Jill, what the fuck is going on? There were ducks. Of course, there had to be. Probably wouldn't be valid without ducks. Ask John Le Carre or one of those people. Jill, who'd obviously done this sort of thing loads of times before, had brought stale bread to feed them with. She tore a finger and thumb pinch out of the heart of the loaf and threw it into the water, which immediately churned and frothed into a seething, duck-crammed maelstrom. I told you, she said. You're absolutely right. It's me. Chris looked at the ducks, not at her. You wouldn't lie to me, would you? No, never. For crying out loud, Chris, we've known each other since we were tiny tots, and when have I ever... Loads of times, he snapped. Balls. Name one time I've lied to you. Right. He took a deep breath. There was a time I really fancied Amanda Mizzen, and I asked you if you thought she liked me, and you said I was trying to be nice. You lied, though, he said. You said, yeah, go for it, and look what happened. She poured warm custard into the pocket of my blazer. Jill nodded. True, but strictly speaking, I didn't lie to you. I gave you advice, bad advice, she added quickly. I grant you that, but I never actually said yes. She fancies you rotten. She told me so herself. Now, did I? Chris frowned. All right then, he said. What about the time when... Let me rephrase that, Jill interrupted briskly. When have I ever lied to you about something not utterly trivial and unimportant?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Fair enough. But there's always a first time." "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said, with a sudden spurt of anger. "You might have bloody well told me." "Told you what?" "That you're a—" He didn't want to see it. It would sound silly. "That you're not strictly human." "That?" She shrugged. "You never asked." "Jill." All right. She raised a defensive hand. "Well, for one thing, you'd never have believed me now, would you?" "Maybe I would have," Chris lied defiantly, "if you'd, I don't know, proved it somehow." "Yeah, sure." She gave him a little frown. "Besides, I think you ought to consider it from my point of view. I've never been, well, comfortable about it. There are some things you just don't tell anybody, even your very best friends, aren't there?" "No." "Really?" Jill grinned suddenly. "Like, you never told me about Pongo." "No, of course. Hold on," he said angrily. "How the hell do you know about that?" Her grin broadened. "Pongo was your cuddly stuffed rhino," she said. "He slept on your pillow till you were 14, and you couldn't go to sleep unless he was there." "Bless," she said vindictively. "That's different," he said. "That was, well, private." "And being a non-human with carnivorous tendencies wasn't?" The grin turned into a smile, but there was still loads of teeth in it. Just a hint of double standards creeping in there, don't you think? "Pongo wasn't important," Chris replied sullenly. "I mean, he wasn't going to suddenly jump up and start savaging people with his razor-sharp fangs, was he? And you haven't answered my question. How did you know?" Jill shrugged. "Saw him in your eyes," she replied. "It's a knack we've got. Sometimes, if you look really closely, you can see a reflection there. Anyhow, that's beside the point. I never told you because it was private, and, naturally, I was afraid it would spoil everything. With you lot, my friends, well, it would have done, wouldn't it?" Chris scowled. "Not unreasonably," he said. "I mean, all the while we thought you liked us, and really you were just feeding." She threw another handful of bread shrapnel into the heart of the duck storm. "Yes," she said, "that's what friends do. They nourish each other. It's what friendship is." One duck was treading on another duck's head, trying to get at a chunk of steel crust. Presumably they were friends too. "Maybe," he said, in a rather strained voice. "You were taking that idea a bit to extremes." "Not really," Jill replied briskly. "Friends supply each other's needs, and in return they give back. I got what I needed, and in return I was always there, for all of you. Don't say it hasn't been a great help over the years." "Yes, but—" "It has," she said fiercely. "You know it has. All through the difficult times, the living hell of human adolescence, I was there looking after you all, listening, nodding, making little sympathetic noises, took but a shoulder to cry on. If I'd been human, I'd have caught pneumonia." "You were lapping it up," Chris snapped back. "Literally." She was still and quiet for a moment, and then she shrugged. "All right, so I wasn't completely selfless and altruistic. You were all still my friends. She frowned, then added, "I liked you. Really, you have no idea what that was like for one of my lot. We don't do that, you see. We don't like the way you humans don't walk through walls. It's not that we don't want to, it's just that we can't. But suddenly I found out that I could, and it was, well, nice. That's when I decided there had to be a better way." He looked at her. Deep in his head, his inner Poirot was waving and pointing at something, but he took no notice. "Is that right?" he said. "Yes." "Fine. In that case, tell me exactly what happened that time in the girls' toilets." For a long time, Jill didn't move or speak. Then she tore up the remaining bread into little bits. "Watch this," she said, and threw the bread into the water. The ducks didn't move. The bits of bread floated for a few seconds until they grew waterlogged and sank. "I can do that," she said. "I can control other living things up to a point, either because they're very, very stupid, like ducks or rugby players, or because they aren't aware that I'm doing it. I can do it, but I don't. It would be cheating." Chris thought for a moment, then said, "I've only got your word for that." "Yes, but I never lie to you." He nodded. "So," he said, "what really happened?" "To begin with," Jill said, "I wasn't what did you call it? The one who is to come. Did you think of that all by yourself, or—" "No? I thought not. No, that wasn't me. Quite the opposite. Actually, allow me to introduce myself. My number is 666A, and I used to be a vice-marshal of the Diabolic Host. Sounds impressive, but actually it's kind of somewhere between Postmaster General and Presidents of the War Graves Commission. And that was okay. I was a career civil servant, working my way gradually up the ladder, the way you do. Pretty much like I'm doing now, in fact. Like we say, you can take the demon out of the office, but you can never take the office out of the demon. Anyway, that was me. And one day, I got called in and was told they wanted someone for a long-term undercover mission to find the dissident leader and, well, take her out. Not really my cup of sulphur, but they dropped some heavy hints about promotion and doing my career a lot of good. So I said, yes, please, when do I start? And the next thing I knew, I was being born. It was hell being brought up as a human. I knew that the most important thing was not blowing my cover, as in grabbing hold of the first human I saw and tearing its head off just so I could taste the rich, creamy fear. That would have ruined everything, they told me, and I wasn't to do it, which was fine, but it meant that all the years I was growing up, I was starving hungry all the bloody time, absolutely famished, like being on one of those diets where all you get all day is one glass of carrot juice and a stick of celery. The only way I could keep going was by constantly having rows and tantrums with my parents. Yes, that's right. They haven't spoken to me for years, and I can't say I blame them. Happiest day of their lives when I left home, and the last I heard of them, they were crossing the Nullarbor Desert in a camper van. I feel sorry for them now. I can't have been very nice to live with. I knew my people had put me in the right place at the right time. All I had to do was wait till the dissident leader showed up, and I'd know her right away. For a start, she'd be one of us, so she'd stick out like the proverbial sore talon. Soon as I located her, I was to zoom in, do the job, and then I could bug out and come home. I couldn't wait. And then, at the start of the summer term in year 12, there was that new girl. You remember? Actually, Chris said, there were two new girls. There was... Don't interrupt, Jill said. There was that new girl, and as soon as I looked at her, I could see she was one of us. My lord, a demon. That's got to be her, I thought. Thank God for that. I can do the job and go home. Hooray, I thought. What was her name? Ellie something. Like it matters. It was an assumed name, obviously, and anyway, I've always hated names. Well, I guess you know why by now. I've had to learn to endure them, but each time I say one or hear one, it still burns me, like putting your hand on a hot stove. Anyway, there she was, and it was just a question of biding my time, choosing the right moment, making the kill and getting out. Easy enough, you would have thought. I could have just walked up to her in the playground and bitten her head off. God, I really wanted to do that. After all those years of living off emotional lettuce, finally the chance for a nice juicy steak. That's what I was expected to do. It's what my training was all about. It's what I should have done. But don't ask me why. But when it came to it, I just couldn't. Not like that. in plain view of everybody. I guess I'd been around humans too long. I'd got soft, or gone native, something of that sort. I don't know. Maybe I'd learned fear from the humans. It's not something that exists back home, but once you're on this side of the line, it's terribly easy to start believing in it, whatever the reason. I didn't just crack on and get it over and done with. I kept putting it off, making excuses, didn't want to draw attention, didn't want to cause an incident, afraid there might be repercussions for other expat demons on the human side of the line. All just excuses, naturally, but I didn't do it straight away, and you know how it is. The longer you put off doing something, the harder it is to do it. I started getting memos, notes, messages on my phone from the authorities back home. I was quite clever about fobbing them off, but I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. Eventually, I realized I couldn't hold out any longer. I chose a day and said to myself, right, on this day, at 11:15 precisely, I'll do it. And as luck would have it, at 11:15 precisely, Ellie, whatever her name was, went into the girls' toilets, and I followed her. I didn't know my friend Karen was in there too. I definitely had no idea you were there. I went in, grabbed the stupid cow's hair, and slashed her throat. Job done. You? Jill shrugged. Me? She said. You've got a problem with that? Well, Chris said slowly. Yes, I suppose I have. It was justifiable homicide as far as the authorities were concerned, Jill said firmly. Quite possibly justifiable pesticide. At least that's how it would have been seen back home, if only... She'd stopped talking. Chris waited for as long as he could bear, then repeated, If only? If only, Jill continued, I'd killed the right demon. But I hadn't. Well, quite. Didn't I ever feel stupid? As soon as the fuss was over and I could get somewhere private where I could report back, I called in and said, job done, and they said, no, sorry, you're wrong there. Our scans clearly show the continued existence of the dissident ringleader. In other words, I'd killed the wrong person. By some amazing coincidence, there was more than one undercover demon at our school, and I'd made a simple, basic, bloody, stupid mistake. You can imagine how I felt. No, scrub that. You can have absolutely no idea how I felt. I don't know which was worse, the excruciating guilt or the feeling of being a complete dickhead. They were both pretty bad, and as far as I was concerned, that was it. No more, I say to myself. I'm through with all that. Quite a big decision, as you'll appreciate. It meant I could never go back home, for one thing. Also, I'd betrayed everything I'd always believed in. Well, not quite that. What I'd mostly believed in was the importance of a good job with security and prospects. I'd screwed that up, too. Of course, I'd screwed up more or less everything, but no way was I going to go back out there and try again. My first thought was, make a clean break, change sides. Throw in my lot with the dissidents. That way, with there being a slim chance they might win the Civil War, I had some kind of hope of going home one day. But that was a washout. I mean, the authorities were quite adamant that I'd killed the wrong demon, but the fact remains that immediately afterwards all traces of subversive and dissident activity stopped. Just like that. I hadn't killed the dissident ringleader, but the effect was pretty much the same as if I had. We'd won. Correction, there was still one dissident on the loose. Me. The thing is, you don't just tell the demon authorities where they can stick their job and then walk away whistling a show tune. As soon as they realised I wasn't planning on coming home, they put me on top of the most wanted list. Also, I changed my mind. Really and truly. I was absolutely appalled by what I'd done, actually. I thought, this simply can't be right. Killing people, under any circumstances. It's all very well to talk about it when you're hovering safely in the insubstantial world, where there's no blood to spill or flesh to rip. Actually doing it is, Anyway, I made my decisions. I was converted. If demonkind's got a future, it's through non-violent, non-aggressive emotion farming, and if the real dissident ringleader was too scared and too spineless to carry on, simply because of one bungled assassination attempt, then I'd take over the job and do it myself, which is what I've been doing, basically. ever since. It's why I joined the Delendi Sunt, why I've worked so bloody hard to get where I am today. As soon as there's any sign of demons coming over here to feed, I send my people out and put a stop to it. And let me tell you, I've made a difference there. A real difference. I can sense when they're getting ready to come across, you see, which none of my predecessors could. Attack's down 75% since I took over, and I make bloody sure my bosses know it. They like me a lot, but my standing orders to my field operatives is, bring them back alive, if they know what's good for them. I tell them it's so that the demons can be safely and humanely disposed of. What I actually do is put the fear of God into them and send them back home again. They don't tend to come back after that.
So, you aren't her after all?
Jill gave Chris her extra special, exasperated look. Haven't you been listening? Yes, I'm her. I'm the leader of the dissident movement, currently in exile on your side of the line. I'm the one they're trying to find, which is why they've been coming after you, because they can smell me on you. What's so difficult to understand about that? It talking of how weird his life had been lately, that Chris didn't react particularly to that last question. Instead, he said quietly,
You aren't her, though. Well, are you?
Jill was trying to steer calm, an impressive sight seen through binoculars. Close up, just plain scary. If you mean I'm not the one I was originally sent here to kill, yes, you're quite right. But she's disappeared, like I just told you. Nobody's heard so much as a twitter out of her for 16 years. She doesn't matter anymore. But Chris shook his head.
If I've got this right, he said, 16 years is nothing to your lot. Time doesn't even work properly where you come from. You may have forgotten that because you've been over here so long, but I don't suppose they see it that way. Sigh.
Fine, she said. Let's suppose, for the sake of a completely pointless time-wasting argument, that you're right. In that case, why have they been wasting their valuable time and energy on you when you're... no disrespect, you understand. When you're just some human who goes around selling junk to shops? He scowled as he answered,
Maybe it's because I was at school with you, both of you. Well, have you considered that? It's a possibility. Maybe I do know where she is, like they keep telling me I do. Maybe...
Chris stopped himself before he could go any further, because if the flash of intuition that had burned patterns on the insides of his eyelids happened to be right, sharing it with Jill, who'd come here from over there on the purpose to do murder and her duty, might not be the smartest move ever. Maybe what? I got them in Debenhams.
Ignore me, he mumbled, thinking aloud.
There was the strangest look on Jill's face. Thinking what?
Oh, nothing. Can't remember if I put the rubbish out this morning. Or is it recycling today and the rubbish on Tuesdays?
A duck waddled towards them with a very determined look on its face. It got as far as the edge of Jill's shadow on the grass, turned smartly round and hurried back the way it just come. I've never lied to you, she said. You, though, I'm not so sure about.
What? I don't know what you mean.
Oh, cast your mind back, Jill said, in a soft but distinctly corrosive voice. The last time we had a drink together. I left my bag in the pub. You took it on with you. There was a packet of biscuits.
What?
He stared at her.
You're not still banging up on about those bloody biscuits?
Her eyes were cold and very, very sharp, like a needle in a syringe. Actually, she said, yes, I am. You're sure you didn't eat them?
Yes, of course I'm bloody sure. It's not what you'd call a grey area.
Fine. And Karen wouldn't have.
Karen doesn't approve of biscuits. If it was up to her, she'd have them all lined up against a wall and shot.
Jill nodded slowly. I believe you, she said. But if it wasn't you, and it wasn't her, and you haven't got a dog... Her focus narrowed even further. He could feel the points of her eyes sticking through his skull. someone or something ate them. The question is, who? Chris felt a strong urge to run away. Odd, but real.
"All right," he said. "Look, does it really matter?"
"Yes!" She'd spat the word at him. Now she took a deep breath and calmed herself down. "Actually, yes, it matters a lot. You see," she went on, lowering her voice just a trifle, "they weren't, well, ordinary biscuits." Needlessly surreal, Chris thought.
"Really?"
"No." Jill breathed out heavily and looked away. "They were bait." "Bait? All right."
"What, you mean like rat poison or something?"
"You could say that." She was looking at the ducks, which were scampering towards the water as fast as their feet could carry them. "They were guilt biscuits."
"Excuse me?"
"Guilt biscuits. Massively emotionally charged. You put them in someone's desk drawer when they're on a diet. Once they've been there a day or so, assuming they haven't been broken into, they're absolutely steeped in guilt, longing, self-loathing and greed. Of course," she went on, "the demon can't digest the actual flour and sugar and egg and stuff, so I expect that somewhere in your flat there's a big pile of crumbs, probably hidden away behind a sofa or something." She turned her head and looked at him hard. "You're absolutely sure Karen didn't eat them?"
"She got them in Debenhams," Chris told himself. "And they don't sell enchanted magical talismans, just like Halfords don't sell little dangly things that hang from your rear-view mirror and turn out to be powerful supernatural entities. I just told you, didn't I? Come on, think about it. When did Karen start at our school?"
Jill frowned. "Same year as you and me."
"Right," he said firmly. "So if she was the demon you were sent here to find, you'd have known all along. Damn it, how long have you known her? Surely if she was, well, one of your lot, you'd have known straight away. Just one look at her, like with the other girl, the one you—"
But Jill was shaking her head. "Not necessarily," she replied. "It's not as straightforward as that." Chris winced inwardly. Why wasn't he surprised? "A demon can take human shape," she went on, "like I did, but it's quite a performance. Basically, you've got to be born human. If you want the technical stuff, you enter into the embryo in the 19th week, assuming there's no complications. You displace the human, and there you stay until the human body dies. No, it's not very nice. But please don't pull faces at me, or I'll see to it you stick like that. Anyhow, a demon who's done that I can spot straight away. There's an aura, a sort of puke-coloured glow that I can see and you can't. But that's not the only way."
"Ah,
quite," Jill nodded. "In fact, it's very rare, because why the hell would one of us want to be one of you without a really good reason? The other way is far more usual." She paused, rummaged in her carrier bag and took out a doughnut. "Completely stale," she said, "but it's been sitting on a plate in my secretary's desk for 4 days. In human terms, it would be death by chocolate with whipped cream and fudge sauce." She took a savage bite out of the doughnut, and it seemed to restore her. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed in deeply and out again, then spat her mouthful towards the ducks. They didn't move. "A demon can piggyback on a human being," she said, "by means of a carrier. It's a bit like blowflies." She stopped, burped, and went on. "They lay their eggs in open wounds. Demons can do more or less the same thing, only of course the wounds need to be emotional rather than just physical." Suddenly she grinned, the grin of a hungry man thinking about food. Only needs to be a scratch, so to speak, though it doesn't stay that way for long. A demon can burrow its way into a little nickel of resentment, and then it digs in, makes itself comfy, and the carrier ends up with full-bore paranoia. Same with all your basic strong emotions, provided there's something there to begin with that it can latch on to. And the trouble is, she went on, a carrier is much, much harder to detect.
"Ah,
She nodded again. "It's like an anchor," she said, "or what's the word? One of those Star Trek thingies. A wormhole. The wound where the demon gets in is one side of the wormhole, and the other ends in a neutral dimension. Let's not get bogged down in all that. It's complicated, and I know how much you struggled in physics at school. I don't want to fry your brain with contra-Cartesian coordinates and stuff like that. Just think of it as somewhere else. What you've got is a kind of pied-à-terre, like living in a big house in the country and having a little flat in London for when you want to go to the sales or see a show. The demon doesn't have to be there all the time, on this side, I mean, but whenever it wants to, it can just pop across and have somewhere to go. So a person can walk around with a sort of demon holiday cottage planted in his head for years and years, and unless I happen to see the demon when it's there, I wouldn't have a clue the person was a carrier. Not without specialised equipment, at any rate." Chris thought about that. It made a horrible kind of sense.
"And you think Karen?"
Jill was looking carefully at him again. "You were thinking the same thing," she said, "for different reasons, obviously. But don't you dare tell me the thought hadn't crossed your mind." He wanted to fight, but he was too tired.
"It was just a feeling. I don't know. Look, you're not going to, well, do anything, are you? Only..."
Jill laughed. "You mean kill her, don't you? No, of course not. For one thing, I told you about 1,000,000 times, I've changed sides. If Karen really is carrying the dissident ringleader, I'll want to protect her, not kill her. Besides, you can take out the demon, if you're careful, without harming the human carrier, though some of our lot aren't inclined to put themselves out, if you follow me, especially if they're in a hurry."
"Look," she said,
and though she hadn't moved, it was as though she just grabbed his wrist. "I don't know if Karen's carrying a demon, or if she's involved at all, but if she is, and if the authorities back home are over here looking for the dissident ringleader, well, you've seen them for yourself. You must realise the danger you're in. Both of you. You've got to let me help you," she said harshly. "And that means you've got to tell me everything. Do you understand?" Chris wasn't looking at her. He was watching the ducks. Something about them wasn't right at all. They were sploshing about weakly, swimming in circles. He forced himself to remember. She got them in Debenhams. She'd said so herself. All of this stuff about blowfly eggs and wormholes was just, "I'm not sure," he whimpered, like he'd always said. Pathetic. "It's hard for me. It's also..." Jill's eyes were holes he could fall into if he wasn't very careful.
"You can't take my word for it," she said.
"You've got to see for yourself, right?" He looked up.
"Is that possible?"
The way she laughed made him really wish he hadn't raised the subject in the first place. "Oh, it's possible, all right. It's just not very nice. Still," she added, as he started to say that was fine. He'd cheerfully take her word for anything so long as she stopped looking at him like that. "What great big eyes you've got, Grandma. All the better to eat you with. Ha ha. You want to be sure? I can fix that for you. Just hold my hand," she said. "And it was like he'd caught his fingers in a corridor, and I'll take you there."
"Are you sure it's no bother?"
Chris said weakly.
"I really don't want to put you out."
"No bother," Jill said grimly, as the sky came down on him like a boot on an ant and the sides of the world came rushing up to squash him. "Just one thing, though. If you don't come back, can I have your Springsteen collection? It's not for me, you understand. It's for..." He was falling. Into her mind, yes, but he was also falling down a very real shaft with very, very real sides, and it was very familiar in an very, very real sense. "She flushed me down a bog," Chris thought as he fell. "Bitch." He fell a bit further and thought, alternatively, at Honest John's, maybe he didn't flush me down an actual real toilet. Maybe he just wanted to take me on a tour of his brain. Mine like a sewer. Ha ha ha.
He fell a lot further and thought, so if demons can't actually shapeshift at will, like I've been assuming they can, then both Angela and Karen are. He fell further still and thought, assuming those specs that Frank Slade gave me actually do what he said they do. But hang on though, Derek the Dayglow person confirmed that, so it's probably true. He fell even further and thought, in which case all these years I've been sleeping next to a demon. And a bit further and not just sleeping either. Oh, shit. Then he fell some more and thought, that's if I'm prepared to accept everything Jill said at face value. And am I? Well, yes, she's Jill and she's never lied to me. And then it occurred to Chris, as he fell, that he was plummeting down an incredibly long shaft at a scarily fast speed, and unless the bottom of Jill's mind was lined with a deep stack of thick, bouncy mattresses, he most likely wasn't going to survive, unless, of course, a hummingbird or something of the sort happened to fly up onto his feet and... no hummingbird, just more falling. Oh, he thought, and then a little later, after some more falling, he amended that to... oh well, assuming, he thought, as the sides of the shaft whizzed past his nose. I really am inside Jill's mind, and she didn't flush me down a very real toilet, pretending I was inside her mind, but what the hell, he thought. If you start questioning every bloody assumption, you'll never get anywhere. Not that I'm anxious to arrive anywhere right now, not unless someone can lend me a parachute. Oh well, he thought again, and fell some more. After he'd been falling for quite some time, Chris glanced at his watch. Then he fell some more. Then he looked at his watch again. 10 minutes later. Now that's just weird, he thought as he fell. He thought, I can't remember the exact formula, but surely, if I'd been falling all this time, when eventually I do hit the bottom, instead of just going splat, I'm going to punch a hole like a lead bullet through a steel plate. Probably come out in Sydney, still accelerating. Pity I'll be dead. I always fancied seeing Australia. He thought, but didn't fall. He'd stopped. When had that happened? He'd been so preoccupied thinking about the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House and wherever it was they filmed the soaps that he hadn't actually noticed. But as soon as he was absolutely sure he wasn't falling anymore, a sign lit up out of the shadows and told him, "You are here." Okay, he thought, but he was painfully conscious of hanging upside down, blood rushing to his head, vision starting to blur, unfortunate shifting of other bodily fluids inside his already overtaxed plumbing. He'd be ever so much more comfortable if only he could be standing on his feet instead. Chris didn't move, but the world did. At least it came to rest under his feet and pressed reassuringly against the soles of his shoes. Much better, he thought. Thanks. And then, because it couldn't do any harm to try, he said aloud, "Excuse me, but where is this?" There was someone standing next to him. "Fancy meeting you here," she said. "No, don't look round. I mean, you can if you like, but it'd be much better if you didn't. For both of us." Just when I thought I had a tiny fragment of a clue, he sighed to himself. "SatNav," he said. Oh, so what could SatNav be doing in the annals of Jill's mind? And other such noises. See, this is the thing. This is the thing. It starts getting really lively about this point, which is awesome. So, hopefully we'll be having another episode, another chapter for you in a couple of days' time. If you can hit the like button and let me know what you think of this chapter, keep chatting on, because it's always good fun when I hear little chats and conversations with you guys in the comments. But yes, please bing the notifications bell if you don't already. If you want to subscribe, if you haven't already and you enjoy it. If you want to share it, wow. Well, thank you very much. But all the time, if you can hit that little like button and let me know you've enjoyed listening, that would be awesome. And thank you all for being here. I do appreciate you. You make my day every time I see those comments. And I don't say that lightly because I'm really quite antisocial. Introverts unite. You know, I think that's why we all get on. Okay then. So, I'll be back in a couple of days. Take it easy. Have good rest. Big smiles and all that jazz. And stay safe.
Talk to you soon, Petal. Take it easy. Keep smiling. Nee, 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 nee. No! We will mend it, we will fix it, we will stick with scissors and glue. Oh my god. I actually have the clangers downstairs in my cupboard as well. That's another one. I'm so sorry. Be finger mouse next. Take it easy.